Hey, what's up guys, aarava here, and welcome back to a brand new video here today, and welcome to my reaction of the final 2020 Formula 1 car, the Renault F1 team, piloted by Daniel Ricciardo and Esteban Ocon this year, of course. And Renault, one of the annoying teams, really, that wanted to string out their launch and still haven't fully launched their car in their livery, actually, because they've got a test livery, which is all black with the yellow numbers, which a lot of people say is really slick, but I don't really get it. I mean, it looks cool as a test livery, but I wouldn't ever have it as an actual race livery per se. But to be fair, it doesn't matter, because it looks like from the teaser photos that Renault put out that the livery will literally be the exact same as last year. So yeah, not much to say on that aesthetically, but the Renault launch was a bit odd. They launched the car with a very weird soft launch by putting some teaser photos out that showed nothing really of significance from the car, because they said the car was not ready and they didn't want to do a fake car like they did last year where the car wasn't ready. So the first time the car was actually ready and built was at Barcelona when they did a shakedown on Monday. They did some filming days with Esteban Ocon with the livery on the actual car. Then they removed the livery for the actual testing beginning today. It's all very Renault, to be honest, with the way they operated last year, and just in general. I think the general vibe has been a little bit confusion and lost in the last year or so, really, from Renault, because obviously they're trying to make this step up to become one of the top teams in F1. It really has been a bit of a stumble for them in terms of last year. It wasn't the step up they were hoping for. They said all year long they had issues with the kind of front end of the car. They wanted to, change that and alter the bargeboard area, pretty much the first half of the car, which was what the team principal said. And lo and behold, they have actually done that, though. Technically speaking, the entire car is looking very different, especially the entire front end in towards the bargeboard area. Made some key differences, which you'll see you'll see on screen right now, but we'll look at them a little bit closer to see what they've copied on. A lot of teams now going for the thinner nose, essentially copying what Mercedes started off with, but now we've got Mercedes, Red Bull, Racing Point. I'm trying to think of any other teams that have got a thinned out nose, really. Well, obviously Renault then, so you've got 5 teams actually, with McLaren also having a thinner nose for the last 2 years, really, as well. So half the grid have gone for this thinner nose profile here to try and get a bit more airflow on either side of the nose instead, and most teams combining that with also a snowplow or a cape of some kind to scoop up the air from that and chuck it directly, very neatly towards the bargeboard area, very finely. And also at the same time, most teams also adding an S-duct in there as well to take some air from the bottom and inject it over the top of the chassis. But let's look into the Renault solution then and see what they got different on this year's car, and see if it's going to be, well, if it looks to be any sort of a major step forward to lead them up, because of course they were, as I said, disappointingly not really in that fight that McLaren solidified themselves in of P4, kind of making a stepping stone to, eventually on this long journey towards becoming a top team once again. So for our first photo, we look towards the front end of the car. First of all, the front wing profile has changed slightly, I feel, with a bit more aggression on the inboard loading on the flaps there, with a bit more of a aggressive swoop, I guess you will, to the kind of trailing edge inwards, and the outside kind of staying the same way. So Renault sticking with that kind of concept of how they want to condition the flow as it goes rearward of the car, but the actual nose and the entire nose structure, you can see, is completely different now. You can see that tapering in very much from the kind of main chassis width into the kind of smaller nose, but this one, probably one of the smaller solutions, really. It kind of almost looks like Mercedes solution from 2015, I want to say, even 2015, 2016 even, really, the way they shaped their nose back then when Nico Rosberg and Hamilton were partnered there. But you can see they've got a very decent snowplow kind of cape going for quite a while backwards towards the bargeboard area, literally almost touching to where the turning vanes would be, underneath the suspension arms there. So probably one of the longest capes we've seen of any F1 team there. So really trying to fine-tunely chuck the air where they want it to be. You can see it curves very subtly in the kind of same complexity as the actual bargeboard itself as it curves outwards there. So trying to get that kind of connection together so the flow can just hop from the front of the car into this cape, then be chucked through to the bargeboard, and then eventually obviously feed itself through to the end plates of the side pod, and then through to the Coke bottle shape of the actual rear in the car to eventually get to the diffuser. So a very long-winded way to get air, but that's obviously the entire point of this entire device. And then you can see the auto inlet there feeding that S-duct. And again, Renault have these nostrils they had from last year as well. All the teams have their very own unique solution to that. Red Bull having, as you would expect, a much more chiseled approach to it, whereas teams like Renault and Force India just very, very simple deflectors, basically, where it's just trying to stop any turbulent air on either side of the chassis affecting that that fresh injection of air from the S duct then. But Renault, like Force India then, changing that entire front end, apart from maybe the actual front wing flaps, whereas Force India or Racing Point rather, have changed those front wing flaps. But Renault going for that difference. As I said, Cyril Bitbull saying that was the area they were unfortunately hampered by last year, was the front end, the kind of condition of the flows that went on through it, as well as the barge wood area. I would assume Renault would bring bigger updates to the barge wood area in week 2 of testing, or maybe into Australia. It doesn't look like it's too different from last year, to be honest, but obviously maybe that very much so for them. They've got, you can see in this photo actually, they've got a lot of aero devices, aero rakes behind, a load of pitot tubes behind the suspension, so they're very much trying to get an understanding of their new nose before they maybe move forward with any kind of upgrades behind all those pitot tube arrangements there at the barge wood area. So big difference for Renault in terms of that front end, but the rest of the car is just very much an evolution from what they had of last year. There are a few little bits and bobs like the T-wing on the rear end, which we'll look into. The actual inlets themselves, similar to what they had last year in terms of the crash structure, like many teams now, having it at the bottom built into this wing that extends across. Renault having this double upright though, which is unique to them. Most teams only have one upright, and they kind of either curve it out or kind of have it more inward in, but Renault choosing to have 2 uprights then connecting, just have 2 kind of almost slots the air can pass through, kind of separate it a tad maybe, so one slot having the air a bit more attached to the side pod, and the other one kind of going more straight on perhaps, or being affected rather by the barge wood maybe that you can't see behind this front tyre. If we look on from a side profile of the Renault, it's well, you can see why they've maybe done the livery all black basically, because it is a little bit tougher to maybe see the fine intricacies of the barge board, but it seems like they have a bit more of a chiseled boomerang wing, I would say, from the upright into the chassis face, but the rest of it all very much what they had at the end of last year with Abu Dhabi. If we look at the engine cover itself though, I feel like subtly it is a bit more tapered in, especially when you go look at it kind of from the vertical side of things around that Castrol Edge logo. I think they've kind of tucked it in a little bit more. You can see the way it kind of swoops over and curves over with the exhaust exit as well, so I think they've tried to vacuum seal it as much as they can on that rear end. Obviously the Renault engine didn't really have too many major issues with overheating. It did have a few times where it went pop for the Renault Works team rather than the McLaren team itself, so maybe they've got a bit more efficient with the way they packaged the engine as a whole. And then the coke bottle shape itself, I don't think it's really changed that much from last year. So in terms of Renault making huge strides, obviously the front end is quite a major one, so that will maybe be a massive deciding factor for them. But when we look at the middle of the car and the rear end, not much has changed in a dramatic way compared to even a team like McLaren, their main rivals. The McLaren team turned up to testing with a much different side pod to the one they actually launched their car with, much more suckered in, massive undercut on the inlet as well. So if they wanted to try and catch up and keep up with McLaren, in terms of we look at the rear end of the car, they're already kind of having to play some catch up there, but of course things are still to come. Like I said, they may be just testing on the front end before they actually looking to some major upgrades on the rear end of the car. But they do have that juicy T-wing attached on. They didn't run that, at least at the testing at Abu Dhabi for the young drivers test, and when they ran Ocon in the car for the first time at the end of season test at Abu Dhabi, they didn't run that then. They may have done it a few times earlier on the season, but that's definitely something they didn't end up with at the end of Abu Dhabi. The shark fin, they've gone for a very Ferrari style massive shark fin, so they have actually done a decent job, at least vertically again, getting the engine cover swooped down, but then horizontally I think they could have definitely tapered that in a lot more to get a better coke bottle shape. But like Ferrari, a big meaty shark fin there, just obviously space they have to actually have now due to the new rules this year. They have to have that space there for the numbers. So like Ferrari, they've just gone with a massive bit of carbon fiber there, but the numbers a bit I'm actually looking at it right now, a bit weirdly placed there. Although speaking about weird numbers, the Williams car has probably the weirdest numbers I've ever seen on the side of the car. You really just can't even see what on earth is going on. But we look again from a different angle then of the front end, and this one you can maybe get a better sense of that massive cape going on. Definitely the biggest cape that any team has got on the front end, as it starts off here at a usual position, but it extends all the way out literally underneath the suspension arms. Usually most teams have extended turning vanes at this point. Like if you look back at the Ferrari car, which obviously was a while ago now, the Ferrari car had its turning vanes extended and had 4 slot gaps all the way to about here where my mouse is, whereas Renault opted to have the cape instead extend further. So there's maybe pros and cons to that in terms of Ferrari don't even run a cape, so maybe that's obviously a different philosophy of going with just having that kind of nostril nose and then having the wider nose, but then allowing the turning vanes to be a little bit earlier, so it affects the flow earlier in that kind of sense, whereas Renault are going for this more kind of trying to kind of scoop the air out earlier and then try and chuck it directly through to the barge board there. So different ways to go about it. Obviously Renault have gone with this philosophy and Ferrari the other. Both obviously will do near enough the kind of same job, but just in a different way way of how you then condition the flow as you go back. Obviously, the barge wood is very different on Ferrari to Renault's. Renault's, I would say, is probably more towards the Mercedes style, whereas Ferrari have gone for a different approach where obviously their barge wood arrangement has been very, very high and aggressive as we saw their launch there. But looking through at the entire side structure of the Renault again, if you just compare it to photos earlier, Abu Dhabi basically very, very similar. They've done away with that AeroCat device they had from like 2 seasons ago. I've got to say, Renault had an issue actually at pre-season. Before Ricciardo got in the car, he lost about an hour and a half changing over from Ocon in the morning, which I think some people have tried to play off as just them changing everything around for Ricciardo, but as the commentary of Crofty and Palmer suggested, I don't think that it's probably going to be that. I think there was some sort of issue they hit, but they've not said anything about what the actual issue was. So Renault, the only real team with massive issues so far. I say massive, lost an hour, but I mean, if testing's only 3 days now on this week and 3 days next week, it is kind of a big deal to lose a whole hour and a half. So yeah, the only massive issue for a team so far has been Renault. So yeah, a bit of a shaky start to preseason again in terms of they're one of the teams that they themselves had to look inwards and they had to hit the ground running so quickly because last year was definitely a disappointment. They weren't where they wanted to be. I think even Ricciardo had to kind of adjust his kind of ambitions of where the team was and where they're going to be for this next year into 2021. And so they're the team that had to make a massive leap. And so far, personally, in my opinion, it doesn't look like they're not gonna make that straight away. Yes, the front end's a lot different. So that may make a big difference for them going forward in terms of development of the car. But where they start off at Australia, unless that bargewood area and the whole sidepod kind of area changes dramatically, I don't know. I just think they'll kind of be where they were, kind of where they're kind of maybe just trying to keep Racing Point, Toro Rosso, and Haas at bay, and Alfa Romeo, but they're not quite able to match toe-to-toe McLaren consistently over Grand Prix distance. But of course, it's early days. That's a massive, massive opinion and foresight by me, and it could be completely proved wrong as we go through testing. Obviously, it's early days. So, but that's my opinion, and kind of look at the Renault car, what's really changed there. So let me know what you guys make of Renault, what your feelings are about the team. Do you feel like they'll make that step that they need to for this year or not? Or do you agree with me that maybe it might be another year where they're kind of left frustrated about that? And let me know what you thought about the whole launch thing, because I personally think Renault have had one of the worst launches in terms of like building up hype or anything for their car or livery or anything really. I think they've just done the worst job, which is just really odd because it's Renault. It's one of the factory teams, and you've got teams like Williams, where historically they've not made a lot of hype out of their car, but even their car looked pretty damn hype on launch, whereas Renault just did this very odd thing of not launching the car properly with photos. Then they come to testing without, showing the livery in proper, or they do show the livery in proper, but in black and white, it seems to be the same livery as last year. Just a bit of a poor form if we talk about marketing, basically, from the Renault team, but that's just a kind of different point entirely from the car. But yeah, let me know about all that good stuff. If you did enjoy the video and found it informative, then be sure to hit that like button. If you're new around here to subscribe for weekly full-on content, that has been all the car launches now for 2020 and all the cars kind of looked at. I will be trying to do a bit of a roundup of testing in general of kind of any major changes to any cars in terms of little tidbits here of aerodynamics at the end of the week, or potentially I might do a whole roundup of both weeks combined. So look out for that if you're new around here. But till then, guys, hope you enjoy the rest of the day. I've been aarava. Goodbye.